Welcome back, class. We now begin our discussion on Chapter 7, looking at the key figures of Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and the period to which they came up with many of their ideas. We look at the background, why these movements of Romanticism and existentialism, the relationship between the Enlightenment and Romanticism, and then we'll look at specifically at Schopenhauer and the Romantics and Nietzsche and the existentialists. So let's look at the background. As we saw in previous lectures, the Enlightenment was a very influential period. The Enlightenment is a period during the 18th century where reason was advocated as the primary source and legitimacy for authority. You had to have logic, rationality behind the things that you made decisions of and the ideas that you would offer. Reason could be used to combat ignorance, superstition, and tyranny in order to build a better world. So what had happened before Enlightenment was the scientific revolution, and they came up with lots of ideas and processes at that time. And they wanted to use those ideas that came about during the scientific revolution to use them during the Enlightenment period to improve society and the condition of man. The principal targets of the Enlightenment philosophy were religion and the social domination by the hereditary aristocracy. Kings ruled, monarchs were the rule of the day. And so the idea is they wanted a more common way for people to be able to participate in their governing. So Enlightenment had political influence, and it was a strong influence. The signatories of the American Declaration of Independence, the United States Bill of Rights, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, and the Post-Lithuanian Constitution were motivated by Enlightenment principles. So why these movements, Romanticism and existentialism? Well, basically, they were reactions to and criticisms of the ideas and the philosophy of the Enlightenment. Oftentimes, as society goes one way, some people may think it went too far, and then there's going to be a gut reaction, so to speak, and they go the opposite direction kind of far themselves. So, again, these movements were based on the fact that people did not fully get behind the ideas of the Enlightenment. So let's compare the Enlightenment versus the Romanticism period. The Enlightenment, the focus was about reason. For Romanticism, it was about passion and emotion. In the Enlightenment, human nature was the focal. We, man. Whereas in Romanticism, it wasn't about man, it was about nature itself. Nature was important. During the Enlightenment, man could subdue nature, man over nature. Whereas during the Romanticism period, nature over man. We don't need to build cities. We need to live harmoniously with nature. During the Enlightenment, they looked forward into the future. During the Romanticism period, they wanted to look backwards to the past, seeing the past as being better somehow. During the Enlightenment, there was a great deal of disdain toward the Middle Ages and all the ideas of the Middle Ages. In the Romanticism period, the Middle Ages were not looked at as a negative. So what is this Romanticism period? What was it? Well, Romanticism was an artistic, literary, musical, and intellectual movement that originated in Europe toward the end of the 18th century, and in most areas was at its peak from 18 to 1850. So you can see from this painting, I don't know which one it is, I forgot, but the idea is that everything was sort of grandiose. You see a man sitting, not busy doing anything, enjoying nature. That was the feel that they wanted to communicate during this time frame of Romanticism. So the movement was more widespread both in its origin and its influence than the Enlightenment was. No other intellectual artistic movement has had comparable variety, reach, and staying power since the Renaissance at the end of the Middle Ages. What it was. So again, very much about artistry, literary movement, intellectualism. Again, the idea is that it originated in the later 18th century, and strengthened during the Industrial Revolution. It was partly a revolt again against the aristocracy, social and political norms of the Age of Enlightenment. It also was a reaction against the scientific rationalization of nature. It was embodied most strongly in the visual arts, music, and literature. The movement stressed strong emotion as a source of experience, placing new emphasis on those emotions. It was a popularist movement. It elevated folk art and custom to something noble. Let's go back during the time of the Enlightenment. We'd have people go to areas of the world which were not, quote, civilized, and you would see the natives. The natives needed to be brought up to their level. We needed to teach them, train them. But during the period of Romanticism, that wasn't the idea. Here, what they did, what the natives would do, would be seen as noble. So during the Enlightenment period, when civilized folks would go to an area where there were natives, they would just be seen as savages. But during the Romantic period, they go to this place where they're not civilized, so to speak. They're no longer savages, they're noble savages. So they argued for a natural epistemology of human activities that's conditioned by nature in the form of language and custom and usage. The idea is that we can learn about gaining knowledge by looking at the natural activities done by these natives, these noble savages. Realism was the polar opposite to Romanticism. So people were elevated and the heroic ideal. So Romanticism elevated achievements to be very heroic. The idea is that you made people larger than life. So you saw people as bigger versions of normal people. And that was one of the key things that we saw also communicated in the Romanticism period. It legitimized individual imagination as a critical authority which permitted freedom from classical art forms. So the idea is elevating people to these huge heroic ideals. So one of the individuals seen as the father of Romanticism was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He emphasized feelings in contrast to reason as the important guiding force in human nature. You couldn't get any more opposite from the Enlightenment than that statement. For Enlightenment period, it was all about reason and logic. Here, he says it's about feelings. It is the important guiding force in human nature. The best guide for human conduct is a person's honest feelings and inclinations. For Rousseau, humans are basically good, born good, but are made bad by societal institutions. So, social nature of humans. Humans are, by nature, social animals who wish to live in harmony with other humans. The general will is what is best within a community should be sharply distinguished from an individual's will. He suggested that education should take advantage of natural impulses rather than to distort them. Educational institutions should create a situation in which a child's natural abilities and interests can be nurtured. Side note, as I've mentioned several times during these lectures, sometimes it sounds like we're not talking about philosophy or psychology at all. But what these philosophers are talking about are about humans and human nature and how you view humans. Are they innately good or innately bad? How you view the human nature at its core will dictate how you believe humans should be governed or ruled or educated. And that's why these things are of importance. Goethe, another individual during this Romanticism period. He was a German writer and considered one of the greatest Germans, man of letters. He did work in areas of poetry, drama, literature, theology, humanism, and science. He was considered a polymath, so he was wicked smart. So he was the author of scientific texts on colors, and he influenced the works of Darwin. So the idea is that Goethe was one of these representatives of an ideal type of person during this Romanticism period. So He also had influence on psychology, or what would later become psychology. Goethe viewed humans as being torn by the stresses and conflicts of life. Life consisted of opposing forces, love and hate, life and death, good and evil. The goal of life should be to embrace these forces rather than to deny or overcome them. These themes were picked up by Freud and quickly became part of his psychoanalytic theory. Goethe insisted that intact, meaningful psychological experience should be the object of study, rather than meaningless, isolated sensations. He was an early phenomenologist. Okay, so Goethe proposed a theory of evolution well before Darwin did, and he used a form of what is now called behavior therapy. So we can see during this period, we saw some little seeds of things that would later sprout into something very powerful within the area and discipline of psychology. Now, for Schopenhauer, Arthur Schopenhauer. Be sure to watch the videos on Schopenhauer during this segment. Very interesting individual. He was somewhat of a pessimist, though. So he was a German philosopher who examined whether reason alone can unlock answers about the world. He emphasized the role of man's basic motivation, which he called will. His analysis led him to the conclusion that emotional, physical, and sexual desires can never be fulfilled. Schopenhauer favored a lifestyle of negating human desires, similar to Buddhism. So the idea is that this individual saw we were in this never-ending cycle of trying to get our needs satisfied. So when he talked about the will, he sort of equated Kant's noumenal world, okay, things in themselves in nature, with will, a blind force which cannot truly be known, the will. In humans, this force manifests itself in the will to survive, or the will to live. This will to survive causes, again, this unending cycle of needs and need satisfaction. So no matter what we do, we'll always have to be striving to satisfy some need, and never truly doing so. So most human behavior, from Schopenhauer's perspective, is irrational. An unending series of pains due to unsatisfied need, which causes us to act to satisfy the need. This is followed by a brief experience of satisfaction or pleasure, then followed again by another need to be satisfied, and it goes on and on and on and on, never truly reaching true ideal satisfaction. So, Schopenhauer's views. Almost all our sufferings spring from having to do with others. All our suffering is having to deal with others. He felt that the intelligent human suffers the most. Intelligent people seek solitude, while common folk are gregarious, seek the group to socialize. For the intelligent, solitude has two advantages per Schopenhauer. You can be alone with his or her own highly intelligent thoughts, and it prevents needing to deal with people who are intellectually inferior to you. Schopenhauer's ideas, not mine. So, Schopenhauer, a way of looking at life is as a postponement of death. People do not cling to life because it is pleasant. Rather, they cling to life because they fear death. He wrote of positive and negative impulses, the unconscious repression and resistance. And of course, with all these ideas and the take that he has on human nature, he had a strong influence on Sigmund Freud. That takes us to the next group of individuals, the existentialists. Existentialism, a philosophical theory or approach that emphasizes the existence of the individual person as a free and reasonable agent determining their own development through acts of the will. Let me give you a little bit of background here. as we have learned so far and discussed so far, the church for centuries have had a very prominent place in people's lives. The church was the source of authority. The church provided us many answers to our questions. One of the big questions that people had was, why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? And the church would provide them that information. But as time went on, especially as we went through the Enlightenment, the world became a little bit more secular, less based on the foundations of a church or religion that the church offered. So people start to lose the reason for their existence, and it became sort of a crisis. People did not know why they existed. They had to find a purpose for their existence. They had to choose what to do because they weren't being told what to do. This caused the crisis, and the crisis was attempted to be met by the existentialists to provide some answers as to how do we, as an individual, see the reason for our existence so that we can make free decisions and act on our own in a positive direction. So existentialism applied to the work of a number of 19th and 20th century philosophers. They took the human subject as the starting point for philosophical thought. It was broader than just the thinking subject. So here we're not just talking about the mind. We're talking about more than the mind. We're talking about acting and feeling, living human individual and his or her conditions of existence. So the existential philosophy is the explicit conceptual manifestation of an existential attitude. It is a sense of disorientation and confusion in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world. When people think about things that happen in the world, people can become quite distressed about why all this is going on, and people can become somewhat lost. Traditional academic philosophy was too abstract and remote for concrete human experience. So the existentialist was trying to fill a void by communicating to people about these things, trying to understand their purpose for their existence in a world that seemed really confusing and meaningless and sometimes very cruel. So existentialism stressed the meaning of human existence, freedom of choice, and the uniqueness of each individual. So, meaning of human existence, you have free will, freedom of choice, and you are a unique individual. The most important aspects of humans are their personal, subjective interpretations of life and the choices they make in light of those interpretations. So, existentialism emerged as a movement in the 20th century literature and philosophy. It was foreshadowed by notable philosophers in the 19th century, such as Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche. Although there are some common tendencies amongst existentialists, these thinkers, on many ideas, there were some disagreements. So, Kierkegaard, 19th century Danish philosopher and theologian. So much of his work deals with religious themes such as faith in God, the institution of the church, Christian ethics and theology, and the emotions and feelings of individuals when faced with life choices. So these things can impact your life on a day-to-day basis. These are some of the ideas that existentialists try to communicate to you about. So he is widely considered the first existentialist. So Kierkegaard, religion. He was an outspoken critic of organized religion. He believed the most meaningful relationship with God was one that was personal and not dictated by the church. He also had an idea about truth. To Kierkegaard, truth is subjective. What a person believes privately and emotionally. Truth cannot be taught logically. Truth must be experienced. And so from this perspective, since there is no real objective truth from his perspective, truth is going to be left up to the individual. And of course, we see examples of this today, where people have their own truth about what goes on in the world, why certain things are happening. So, the approximation of personal freedom occurs in stages, according to Kierkegaard. We have the aesthetic stage. People are open to many types of experiences and do not recognize their ability to choose. So they're open to many experiences, but they can't choose. They live on this very hedonistic level, okay? Living in the moment, so to speak, but not making true choices. The ethical stage, people accept responsibility for making choices, but use as their guide ethical principles established by others. So you do make choices and you're responsible for those choices you make, but you are using others, their ethical principles, to guide you. Then we have the religious stage. People recognize and accept their freedom and have a personal relationship with God. The nature of the relationship is personal. People at this stage see possibilities in life that usually run contrary to convention and tend to be nonconformist. If you think back to your previous learning on Kohlberg's moral development, where you have the pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional, it's very similar to this. This will remind you about those ideas and the pre-conventional stage of morality, which occurs till around age 9. Things are morally right if you get rewarded for them and don't get punished for them. That's your decision. And the conventional stage of morality, 9 on to adolescence, you see what is right is that thing that makes order, destroys chaos, and brings order. You know, you follow the rules of the game. You do the right thing because that's the rule. That's the law, so to speak. And then you have post-conventional morality, according to Kohlberg, and that is about you having principles that may go beyond laws and rules and regulations. You now see a higher calling. Something is more important than the rules and laws that may have been established. So there's some similarity to Kohlberg's rules of morality and morality development that we see here with Kierkegaard. And then we have Nietzsche, Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, German philosopher. He wrote critical texts on religion, morality, contemporary culture, and so on. And again, be sure to watch his videos featuring his ideas and concepts on your Canvas site as well. So his influence remains substantial within and beyond philosophy, notably in existentialism and in postmodernism as well. So, in his philosophy, he questioned the value and objectivity of truth, resulted in much commentary and interpretation. So that's one of the things too that we see with the existentialists. What is truth? An ongoing debate. His key ideas include the interpretation of tragedy as an affirmation of life. We go through tragedy and it affirms that we are alive. He rejected Platonism and repudiated both Christianity and egalitarianism in the form of democracy and socialism. So here, the notion is that we have an individual who is trying to understand the importance of life and existence in the world. He wanted to make sure that we understood that we cannot get rid of those parts of ourselves which are irrational, because it is part of us. So Nietzsche proposed two aspects of human nature. Okay, one, Apollonian, a rational side. Okay, desire for tranquility, predictability, and orderliness. And then the Dionysian, where we have the irrational side, attraction to creative chaos and to passion and dynamic experiences. The key idea that we see with his view of existentialism, according to Nietzsche, is that we do not want to ignore these important aspects of ourselves. We have a passionate side that's not necessarily rational. We need to understand that and not shy away from it. So he believed the Western philosophy had emphasized the intellect and minimized the human passions. Western philosophy focused too much on the rational and the intellectual. and forgo the passions. In his opinion, this resulted in a lifeless rationalism. Okay? He urged a fusion of the two aspects, not a totally irrational, but not totally irrational, but a passionate life, but a life of reasonable passion. So you had to have a little bit of passion in life, otherwise you're missing out. It is somewhat a lifeless life, so to speak. So he believed that because of human actions, we had in essence made God dead. Let me explain. Scientists, scientific revolution and enlightenment, they were sort of demystifying the world as they came up with reasons why the world operated the way it did. Then they started to downplay the role of the church as being the key figure, the key authority figure that dictated what people would do with their lives. So in essence, philosophers and scientists sort of took God away from us, from their perspective. So the purpose God took purpose from the universe and stripped humans of any special place in the world. For example, we talked about this previously, the heliocentric model and the geocentric model. The geocentric model, as you recall, had Earth at the center of the entire universe. That made us special. We were at the center of everything. We were on center stage. And because of that, we had no doubt or question that we were special. But as we understood, as the paradigm shifted, and it became clear that we were not the center of the universe, let alone we weren't even the center of our solar system, it took away some of the specialness that was humanity. So basically, all these things added up during the time of Nietzsche here, that humans had no special place in the world or in existence. Convictions are thought to reflect truth, but cause fanaticism. Opinions are tentative, challengeable, and easily modified in the light of new information. So because now we're sort of on shifting sand, so to speak, we're not certain of our place, that we sort of waffle back and forth. That is the idea that he's trying to communicate here. So when he says God is dead and we killed him, that's what it's meant. We lost our specialness somehow. But of course, God has the last laugh. Nietzsche's dead. God, 1900. Now, existentialism. All people have a will. So here, Nietzsche also had the focus of will, very similar to the focus that we saw with Schopenhauer, the Romanticist, earlier. So he had a will, but his was different. For Schopenhauer, it was the will to survive or will to live. Here, it's the will to power. The will to control one's life, the tendency to gain mastery over oneself and one's destiny. Now, again, we have to admit that there is some degree of that. People want to be in control. There is a certain comfort in it. So maybe there is something to this will to power, at least from that perspective. He also had this idea of the supermen. Supermen are people who are approaching their full potential because standard morality does not govern their lives. This is an idea very similar in some aspects to Maslow's self-actualization. You know, the hierarchy of needs, and we have at the very top self-actualization, where someone reaches their fullest potential. So a similar idea here of reaching one's fullest potential. But the other notion that he added here to this notion of the supermen was this: they don't follow standard morality. You have people who will do what they need to do in order to achieve their fullest potential. They're not necessarily going to be the nicest people around. They may have a different code, okay, that will dictate that they can do whatever to get theirs. That's the basic premise that he's communicated. And he's sort of communicated in such a way saying it's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, this idea of the superman or the superman was misused by the Nazi political party as they rose to power in Germany in the 30s, I believe. So they claimed that the German people were, in fact, the supermen, that they can reach as a society their fullest potential, and they don't have to follow the standard morality in order to accomplish that particular task. So, as you saw in the videos as well, dealing on the Superman and Nietzsche's ideas, Supermen are not necessarily going to be individuals who are going to be superheroes like our Superman. It doesn't work that way. Now, to wrap up a few of these ideas, let's go over real quickly Romanticism and existentialism. There will be a few new adds to this as we go over here, go over this information. So, the background. Romanticism, as well as existentialism a little bit later, was a reaction to Enlightenment. They were anti-scientific rationalizations. The key themes during the Romantic period were passions and emotion over reason and logic, nature over human nature, nature over man, more backward looking, an appreciation of the Middle Ages, folk art and custom now seen as noble, and heroism was elevated. Everything was sort of like bigger and larger than life. The key figures were Rousseau, feelings guide human nature. Born good, but societal institutions make us bad. Social animals that want to live in harmony, and education should focus on our natural inclinations. Goethe, he noted that we were impacted by stress and conflicts of life. He wanted to explore meaningful psychological experience, not the isolated sensations. Schopenhauer focused on the role of motivation, the will to live, the will to survive. Desires are never fulfilled. Behavior can be irrational, and life is the postponement of death. Remember, he was somewhat of a pessimistic individual. Now, looking at existentialism, again, a reaction to Enlightenment. The church told us who and why we were. It lost its power in the Enlightenment. The church did. Therefore, we were sort of lost a little bit as to who and why we were, our reason for existence, so to speak. This became more problematic as we became increasingly more secular, less religious and faith-based. Ergo, that led to the expression, God is dead, or God was killed. Philosophers and scientists did so by demystifying and making us less special. So we are lost as to our purpose of existing, and this is the search for the reason of our being. And that is what the existentialism was about, trying to make us understand the key things about us, ourselves as humans. So the key existential ideas were a significance of individual, the importance of passion, irrational as an aspect of life, and the importance of human freedom, of our choices, of the decisions that we make. They're ours to make. Highlights and comments. Passion over logic. We make ourselves. To live is to live passionately. Become the person you really are. Live life to the fullest. Descartes' I think, therefore I am, is a problem, not a solution. It's not at all about thinking, according to their views and ideas. And some of the key figures here were Kierkegaard, looking at the personal relationship with God. Truth is subjective. Personal freedom occurs in stages, the aesthetic, ethical, and religious stages. And Nietzsche, the will to power, having reasonable passion and irrationality, that we don't shy away from those aspects of ourselves.